Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields, and this is Good Life Project. So my guest today is Meg Hirshberg. Meg is a freelance writer, the author of a column at Inc. magazine, a really phenomenal book called For Better or For Work. The husband of Gary Hirshberg, who's the founder of Stonyfield Farms, and mother of 3 kids. And we're going to kind of do a deep dive into all of these different things today. So awesome to be hanging out here with you today. Thanks so much.
For me too. Thanks for having me.
I would love to go a little bit back in time with you. You have been part of the whirlwind life of entrepreneurship for going on 3 decades now, is that right?
Yeah, almost 30 years. I was thinking about that the other day.
Take me back to and how long have you been married too?
We have been married 26 years.
Okay, so pretty similar time frame there.
Yeah.
Take me back to the early days of, one of my fascinations as an entrepreneur and as a writer is because I'm always exploring these questions of how do you live life of, trying to build something extraordinary and at the same time trying to build something extraordinary in your home and your relationships personally. And I'm always fascinated by the very early days of relationships and entrepreneurship simultaneously.
Yeah, well, I don't advise doing them simultaneously, number one. We were, as my father likes to say, expression he used to use is young and stupid. So we really, we just kind of, he had the business. It was a very young business when we met, basically not really even on the map and certainly not making any money. We didn't actually turn a profit for 9 years. So our startup was prolonged and very, very stressful for both of us. But it was a little fledgling thing when I met him, and so I was there, very much in those early tumultuous years. Compounded with that was the fact that I worked with Gary for a while, which didn't work. So we figured that out after a couple of years, stopped doing that. And we also were living at our workplace, which was Stonyfield Farm. It's an actual farm in New Hampshire. We were living at the farm. So we had the business there, the cows till we sold them, all the employees coming up, all the delivery trucks. When I moved up there, his brother and sister lived in the farmhouse, and our partners, the Caymans.
Oh, so this is even much bigger than like a new relationship, a new business. The whole family.
Yeah.
This
was like the whole works.
Right.
And I think I was shell shocked for the first several years.
Now, where were you moving from? Where were you coming from?
I was actually running an organic farm in New Jersey, in central Jersey. I didn't own the farm, I was managing it, and I met Gary at an organic farming conference in 1984.
Got it. So you guys had this shared interest, though, that was sort of the subject of his business, and you decided, okay, I'll go up there and see what we can build together.
Well, I was interested in building a relationship, not building a business, but they kind of came together. So, I think the mission thing is interesting to think about, and Gary and I have discussed it because now in retrospect, there's so many benefits to looking in retrospect, of course. At the time, we were just trying to get up every day and try to not lose everything, basically, for many years. But the mission was very important in the sense that I supported why he was doing what he was doing, but it doesn't justify the business. I wasn't sure about, but I supported the spirit behind it, which ended up being really key. It does get you through some dark days. I think mission can be really critical for the entrepreneur to keep going during those dark hours. But you can't really ask the spouse or the family to sacrifice for mission, even when you share it. That's a whole other thing to bring in. I mean, that's a conversation that needs to happen. You can't just assume that because you're aligned with mission, that therefore you'll be aligned with, wherever the business takes you.
And I get the feeling that conversation doesn't happen.
No, it didn't happen with us.
How long into sort of the relationship did it take for that actual conversation to say, wait a minute, the mission, we both buy into, but there's a bigger conversation that has to happen?
Yeah, that was like last week. I'm serious. I mean, we didn't. There's just times in life, there's times in a business, and there's times in a relationship when you just got to get through it. And you're just going from thing to thing. You've got this business over here, and then you've got kids and you got family and you got a house, you got and whatever it is in your life you're trying to maintain. And frankly, our perspective on all that we experienced really came with me writing the columns and the book. Because every column that I have written in every book chapter, I've sat down, I've actually interviewed Gary for every one of them. And that's what that's what sort of drew out the conversation for both of us. But I interviewed actually hundreds of people, about 250 people for the book.
Right.
So there's a lot of distilled wisdom, not just from Gary's and my experience, but from all these wonderful people. I don't have all their voices in there, but many. All their kind of distilled wisdom about what they experienced and how they got through it. And that stuff it's really important. I mean, it's the book that I wish we had 30 years ago, because then those conversations would have happened.
And I think it's so valuable. You're so right. I mean, as an entrepreneur, those conversations in my life have very often only happened when, like, there was no other place to go than to have the conversation.
Exactly. You reach a crisis,
and to have the opportunity to have that conversation before you hit that point, or have the prompts and have guidance from other people, how have they navigated it?
Exactly. Because in the net, I think entrepreneurship is great for families also. And I actually end the book with lots of little vignettes. They're just paragraph long.
Right.
But of wonderful things that have happened to family members, not the entrepreneur, as a result of being connected to a business. So I think it can be great for spouses, great for children who learn so much about business and how things are manufactured and marketed and sold. And they often have their first jobs in the business. I mean, there's this great economic literacy, plus all the pride the family can feel. We're making this.
Right,
This is who we.
Like we're in it together.
We're in this together. It's part of the family identity. So all that's the upside, but the trick is to really minimize, like with most things in life, to minimize the negatives and to try to maximize those positive outcomes. And that's really why I tackle these topics.
So one of the biggest things that that you've written about, both in your column and in the book, is, for lack of a better word, I'll say balance. And I often wonder, can you really even use the word balance in the same sentence as entrepreneurship?
I don't really. If you look in my book, I don't know that you'll even see the word balance.
Right, and maybe it's just the idea that I'm talking about. But
I think that we torture ourselves with this notion of work-life balance. Sometimes I'll use it to describe part of what I write about, just because it's a convenient shorthand. But I think as a phrase, it's very toxic, because if you, and I have actually asked audiences, how many of you feel in balance right now in your life? Not a hand goes up. I mean, you may experience that sensation of it for one fleeting moment, and then a kid gets sick, or you lose a customer for your business, or something happens. I mean, it's this tenuous place that doesn't really exist in the end. And so the fact that everyone's trying to seek it means everyone feels like a failure because they haven't achieved it.
So it's like you're setting yourself up.
You are setting yourself up. So I stay away from that as a concept. I think it's not about balance. It's really about, in the end, trying to optimize what you're doing when you're doing it. And that's actually harder than it sounds, because what it means is when you're sitting on the floor with your 2-year-old reading The Little Engine That Could, for the 10 minutes you're doing that you're really there. Yeah. You're really there. You're not, sneaking glances at your smartphone and checking email, and, instead of, I think I can, it's like, I think I should go check my email. You've got that on the brain. And likewise, when you're at work, to really be focused on being at work and really make that time very efficient. And I think because we're all trying to do so much and everyone's stressed, all our minds are wandering, everyone's multitasking, that is the least efficient way to be. So part of it's about being really efficient with your time.
Right.
And being very present with what you're doing when you're doing it. I mean, that's just one thing to say. Obviously very easy to say, hard to execute. But I do have a lot of specifics in the book about how we've achieved certain things and how all these people I've interviewed have.
So share some examples
about
ways that you've sort of been able to find that momentary presence Yeah, because I know this is a challenge for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wake up, the first thing I do every day when I roll out of bed is I meditate.
Yes.
And it's
A lot of people,
a mindfulness
yeah.
meditation.
Yeah.
So for me, that's been something that it's helped train me to sort of like constantly be aware of where am I focusing my attention and
Yes.
bringing it back.
Yeah.
But it's a hard, even with that, it's a hard thing to do.
It requires training. You can't
Yeah.
just start doing it. I mean, in the way that meditation will get you, it sort of trains your mind in a certain way. It definitely requires training. One thing that I recommend when it comes to this is what I call setting the bar low. And that feeds back into this, because what I mean by set the bar low is that we have these ideas that, okay, this is how I'm going to balance my life, is I'm going to work like hell for 2 months straight on my business, and then I'm going to take, we'll take a week off and we'll go to Bermuda. Like, that's the balance, right? But then, of course, the time comes to take the week off. You can't take the week off because the business is screaming louder. And you're always tending to the critical care patient, which is usually the business, at least in the startup years. And so you wind up thinking that if you just can set aside these big chunks of time, that gives you permission to just work like hell the rest of the time. Instead of what I mean by set the bar low is take 10 minutes. I mean, Gary and I discovered those days that we just took a walk down the block. It was that simple.
Right.
It was probably a total of 20 minutes without the smartphone. That's really key. Walked down the block and back and just talked about our day, what was going on, no distractions. It just allowed us to really focus on each other for even just a few minutes,
Right.
exchange some information, exhale, and it made everything else more okay. So that's just one strategy, is those little moments, those 10 minutes when you're driving your kid to a basketball practice. Everybody, turn off the music, take out the
right.
the earbuds, and just say, let's just chat for a few minutes while we're on our way. Those little things make a huge difference.
Yeah, and I love that, because so many people, I think it's almost like you were saying, people set themselves up when they use the word balance for these unrealistic expectations.
Right.
And then if you're talking about presence, which is what we're sort of circling around now, it's the same thing. People just keep telling themselves, I'm not present in my life in these things, and well, I need to take huge chunks of time, I need to spend hours. But if you just really chunk it down,
Yeah.
And say, okay, here's a commitment that if I can't make this, there's something really wrong.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And to accept, to really cordon off those things that are critical, like you're saying, but also to accept that some days the business is going to win, and some days the family's going to win.
Right.
And not to beat yourself up over it. Just accept that that's, in the net. I mean, the thing is to really be there in the net, to make it work. But especially women entrepreneurs that I have interviewed, women really shoulder so much of the guilt burden when it comes to children. And they just torture themselves that they're not spending the amount of time or the quality time with their kids.
Right.
So it's a real running theme, and it's so strong, especially among female entrepreneurs, that particular topic, that I devote a whole chapter to it. I mean, it applies to men as well, of course, but women tend to really, chew that one over a lot more.
Yeah, and it's what's fascinating to me is that I think I run in an unusual circle of men where a lot of them are entrepreneurs, but they're really, really, really want to be there as super involved. And a lot of them are, of my age, they have kids.
Yeah.
They want so desperately to play an ever-present, deeply engaged role in the lives of their kids and their partners.
Yeah.
And for the first time, I think in a lot of generations, I think there's an increasing number of men also who are dealing with this thing that women entrepreneurs and working moms have dealt with for decades.
Absolutely.
And we're horribly equipped as men to deal with it.
Yeah.
So we don't talk to each other. A lot of the things that I think help women at least communicate amongst each other and find support, men don't do nearly as organically.
Yeah, and I like you are saying, I think I'm seeing, especially among letters I get from younger male entrepreneurs. I get a ton of letters as a result of the column and now the book. But I hope that, I mean, this is just anecdotal, obviously we don't have numbers on this, but I hope that sea change is happening. because ultimately men will benefit, their lives will benefit just as human beings, and also their productivity, I think, will improve. I think a lot of what we're living with in terms of this vision, this kind of 1960 vision of,
Right.
This is what we do. We
Yeah,
go to work,
the-
and we
the
work, and then we come
version.
home, and,
Yeah, right.
that's all kind of falling apart as a
Right.
model. And we're trying to figure out new ways of working that make sense, whether it's telecommuting or, just so that we can actually be physically home. There's so many more options now for both men and women to help make life and work. So but we're in the middle, I think, of sorting that out, whether it's flex time, that kind of thing. It's starting to happen.
Yeah,
It's exciting.
I think so. I think it is also. I think there's a lot of anguish that's going along with it.
Yeah.
But I think it's in the name and in service of something bigger and better and
Exactly.
more engaged, and something that will serve, the kids, the family, the spouses, everybody.
That's right.
And the business, I think, in
And
the
the
end
business,
too.
I
I
agree.
think when you're happier, you make better decisions. You radiate. People want to
You
be
do.
around you more.
Yes.
You bring something different to your
Absolutely.
venture that people respond to around you.
I think that's absolutely the case. I think we all know it intuitively.
Yeah.
And we also know that, when you go to the office and sit there for 8 or 9 hours, the emphasis on FaceTime
Yeah.
has been, so that's also falling apart. I think people are seeing
Absolutely.
that,
Yeah.
really when you look at an 8 or 9 hour workday, or in the case of most entrepreneurs, a 10, 12, 14-hour
Right.
workday, how efficient are you really being? You
Oh.
feel you've got to be there. But
Right.
if you
But
look,
you're a
if you were
disaster for
honest,
most of the time.
yeah,
Right.
if you were honest and really kept a tally of the amount of time that you were being efficient, there's only so many hours in a day that you can really work efficiently.
Right.
And to recognize that and accept that, and and respect that there are other parts of your life that need to be fed. And as you say, the way I put it sometimes with entrepreneurs when I speak to them is very pragmatically that if your personal life is in tatters, your business is going to suffer.
Right.
That's a very pragmatic way of looking at it, but that's the reality. It all has to work.
Yeah. And I think that's so true. And you brought up something earlier also, which is that you said, as an entrepreneur, especially in the startup years, you tend to focus all of your energy on the critical care patient.
Right.
So here's the big challenge. You also mentioned that Stonyfield was essentially in startup phase for 9 years. That's a lot of time to
It's a lot of
focus
time.
all of your energy on that. And
Yes.
so, and I think we've gotten so accustomed. We hear about tech entrepreneurship, where startups kind of,
Yeah, quite.
the cycle is so fast now.
Right.
But that's not the rest. The rest of the world in sort of like brick and mortar entrepreneurship and the way that most small business operate. It's not that, it doesn't happen that quickly.
No. 9 years, if you're looking at a bell curve of businesses, 9 years is
Right,
way
it's
out
way past-
there.
right, yeah.
But certainly the tech startup speed is unusual too. I think most businesses fall somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And those first few years are really tough. Especially because on a relationship, they're tough on the entrepreneur to keep believing. They're tough on the spouse as well for the same reason, except the spouse, it's even worse for the spouse because the spouse has no control over the situation. The spouse's life is completely affected by what happens with this startup,
Right.
and yet he or she has no say or control. Usually, sometimes, if they're a partner, they do, but that's not usual. So
Yeah.
those can be very tough years, especially when, the normal kind of conversation that happens goes something like when the entrepreneur wants to start a business and speaks with, say in the case of a woman, she sits down with her husband and says, okay, I want to start this pie shop, and what's going to happen is I'm going to have to pull from savings and maybe your salary for the first couple of years, but I've looked at my projections. I should be able to break even in 2 years. After that, it'll be double-digit growth. There are no other pie shops in this whole region. I know I can corner the market, blah, 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 right? Well, those 2 years...
I'm just thinking, I've had that conversation.
Right. 2 years later, right? Have those benchmarks been met? No,
Nowhere close.
Never.
Right.
Almost never.
Right.
And it's not because she wasn't, that she wasn't being smart. It's just there's obviously
You
so
don't know.
much you don't
Yeah.
know. that you discover along the way. So that's kind of a critical moment. It's okay, it's 2 years now, you're pulling more from savings, we're dipping into our kids' college funds, we're dipping into our retirement fund. Where's this going? So that can be a very, very tough, and it was very tough for Gary and me. I mean, we had nothing to lose because we didn't have any money or anything. So,
right.
But my mother was, she was our largest outside investor, and she kept investing and investing. That's why I devoted a whole chapter to friends and family investment, because the burden of that, not saying you shouldn't do it if you're an entrepreneur, but the burden of that is extreme.
Right.
Because your family, the people you love the most, and your friends, they're investing in your idea, of course, but they're really investing in you. So it's very personal. And if you lose that money, and as you know, half of businesses go under in the first 5 years, and then half of the remaining go under in the following 5 years. So you lose the money of people you have Thanksgiving with, and that's a problem.
So how do you have those conversations? I mean, what were the sort of big awakenings that you guys had in having sort of a continuing dialogue with a parent who's the biggest investor as you go through ups and downs?
Yeah, well, we, unfortunately, like most of these things I'm talking about, Gary and I didn't have these conversations till like last week, as I said. But so we had scenarios, literally, this really happened, where he would go to the office when we were living at the farm, which was right next to our apartment. So I'd hear, I knew what he was up to, and he'd call my mother. Usually it was Wednesday night before Thursday payroll, and he'd ask her for another loan or another investment, and I would literally call her on her other line, and I'd say, "Mom, don't do it. Don't do it." I was terrified that she was going to lose this money. What would happen to her retirement? I mean, this was money it wasn't play money.
Right.
This was real money to her. So, there's just the stress of that. And I've interviewed a lot of people around that, a lot of spouses especially, and that stress is pretty universal. It's like,
I'm curious, what was it about your mom, if you've had the conversations with her, that would make her hang up the phone with you and say, Gary, here's the money?
I'm doing it.
Yeah.
She'd always say to me things like, Maggie, I'm a big girl. I'm willing to take the loss if that's what happened. But she believed in the product, and she believed in Gary. She thought it was going to work. But she was willing to take the hit if she didn't. And I wasn't willing to let her take the hit.
Right, so it's like you're trying to protect her.
Yeah, I was really trying to protect her. But then, I'm married to him, and she's my mother. I mean, these are the kinds of... So I do have suggestions in the book for... I mean, obviously, you can never escape the risk.
Right.
But certainly, transparency is key. Being crystal clear with everybody that they may... And the likelihood actually is good, that given the statistics, that they will lose everything. So that kind of thing. And shareholder agreements, usually family members don't even sign shareholder agreements, at least in the beginning. Right. And or sometimes they're offended when asked to sign a shareholder agreement.
Sure.
But I think you absolutely have to insist on it, and just say it's really to protect our relationship. It's because I value our relationship so much that I want this agreement in place.
Right.
So we all understand what's going on. And I think if you put it that way, it'll be more acceptable to friends.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost like, it's like a similar conversation to prenuptials.
Yeah.
It's like, but you're assuming something's going to go wrong, or like, you don't trust me enough. It's like, it's not that. It's just, it's a fascinating dynamic. But one of the things that you explore also is the impact of entrepreneurship, and you've sort of written, entrepreneurship. There's an entrepreneurial family. It's not so much one entrepreneur. And so we've been talking to a certain extent about the dynamic between you and sort of like the primary entrepreneur in life, and your mom. When you have kids, it profoundly changes the dynamic. Also, I would imagine for you, as somebody, the person who's in the relationship with the entrepreneur, but also for the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I know for me, one of my biggest stressors has always been a desperate desire to want to be deeply present in my daughter's life. But at the same time, knowing that it takes, an obsessive push to build something, especially in the early days, to get the inertia to sort of move out of that just early stage into some level of stability.
Yeah.
So you have 3 kids, and they're all out of high school now or out of college?
Yeah, 2 in college and 1's graduated college now.
Looking back, and I know you've spoken with them and written about it fairly recently,
Yeah.
share some of sort of like the conversations that you've had about how they experienced the process of growing up in an entrepreneurial household.
Yeah, it was fascinating. When I wrote the chapter, it's called Minding the Kids, about children and entrepreneurship, it dawned on me, I've never asked my kids it didn't dawn on me to even ask them what they thought of all that we had gone through as a family with respect to the business, which is crazy actually in a way that I never engaged them in that conversation. And I recommend that people do that. And I also recommend another thing that came out of some of my interviews around children and business is having family meetings. People really find regular family meetings. People find those very helpful for staying in touch and finding out what the grievances are from all angles, and letting the kids understand better what's going on in the business as well as they can. Obviously, it's age adjusted, the information that you give. But I sat down with each of my kids, and since I wrote this, other people have written me that they did that with their children because they got the idea from my column or my book. And it's so interesting because I have 3, 2 boys and a girl. One interesting thing is that the boys had a very different reaction from my daughter. The boys basically said, so what was it like for you to have Dad gone so much and distracted? And essentially what they said is that as long as he was there for the basic things, he taught them how to ride bikes, he kicked a ball with them, he coached them, they were happy, no complaints. And one of my sons said, Mom, I think it was harder for you than it was for us.
Interesting intuition there.
Yeah, it was. But my daughter had a very different viewpoint because she felt, even though Gary coached her, he coached all their soccer teams, she kind of felt like she was a repeating item on his Google Calendar more than like this is a time for daddy and daughter. And she felt, that she took personally kind of his distraction level and the fact that he was always gone, and it was hard for her. Yeah. So she said,
were you aware before that of how aware she was of sort of like his being physically present, but maybe not sort of, like psychologically present at times?
No. Before I asked her, no. I mean, she used to rag on him about stuff, but the way kids do. But no, all of this was kind of new to me, actually. And she was 19 when I interviewed her, so I was like, wow, it's crazy. I never talked with her about it before. But even since I interviewed her for the book, I sent the interviews to Gary so he could read everything that they said. Obviously, I didn't put it all in the book, just a few things in the book. But he's changed his MO with her as a result of that. Kidding. So one thing she said, for example, is, Dad, he's always got to be doing things, typical kind of entrepreneur. And sometimes I just wish he would just hang out and chill out with me. Just like sit and watch, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Just, just do nothing. Just hang. And he's really made it's hard for him to do nothing sometimes, but he's really made an effort to just hang out with her, just quiet, do nothing time. And I think it's made a difference.
I love it. I think having those conversations, I think it's got to be
it's illuminating. Yeah.
So
I recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've thought about, sort of how to do things like that in my own life. And I'll have regular conversations with my wife, but I haven't done it with my daughter. And maybe it's because I've assumed that she's at an age where she sees I'm an entrepreneur. She sees me building things. She meets people that I, bring into ventures and stuff like that. Maybe I'd probably just assume that she kind of knows what's going on and she's getting enough of me. But you're making me think that I need to have more deliberate conversations with her.
I think it will be revealing.
Yeah. And at 11, I think my guess is she's probably a lot more aware of things going on than I probably think.
Oh, they inhale everything and miss nothing.
Nah.
Basically. That's what I figured out.
You shared, there was one line, I'm trying to remember if it was in your book or in a column that you wrote about, it was a story, I think the person's name was Barry Edwards, the kid driving up. Can you share that?
Yeah, that was in the chapter Minding the Kids.
Said, wow.
Well, his sea change happened when his wife, he was, really a workaholic startup entrepreneur, and his wife pulled up to his place of business with their 2-year-old Cody. And the little boy Cody looked up and was all excited to see the building where his dad worked, and he said, "Oh, Daddy's house." So when he said that, it was just, and she of course reported this to her husband. It was just a killer for him.
Yeah.
So he actually put up a little poster in his office with it was a poster of a kid who looked a lot like Cody, and just as a reminder, just to call it quits. It said something on the bottom, I can't remember, but it was something to the effect of, work isn't everything.
Yeah, something to just kind of visually remind you.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that's so important also. When I travel, especially when I speak, I don't bring a lot of notes on stage with me. I kind of have an idea. But one time when I was, and I hate traveling without my family, so I don't do it a whole lot.
Yeah.
But one time right before I left, my daughter said, wait, and she kind of vanished for a few minutes, and she came back with a little piece of paper, and she'd drawn a whole bunch of hearts in different colors, like magic markers. And I took that with me, and I brought it, and then when I was going to speak, and I brought that up on stage with me, and I just put it on my, the little monitor there, just so it was like, what, this is what matters.
Yeah.
And I started to just carry that around with me. So whenever I know I'm, it's something that it's just, I look at it for a second and immediately just dials me back to what matters, and brings me back to, I want to go and jump on the phone with her or do whatever I can.
Does that help you during your presentations?
It does, actually.
How so?
Because it reminds me that no matter what happens on stage, I could be brilliant, I could mess up, I could have a bad day.
Yeah.
That's what matters. And I'm going to walk home, I'm going to walk through the door, she's going to run up and give me a hug and a kiss. And that's the thing that I live for.
Isn't it nice? Yeah.
But even that said, as an entrepreneur, you get pulled away from that so quickly.
Yeah.
Because it's like I call it the creative addiction. I think it's so easy for entrepreneurs, and not just entrepreneurs, but artists, writers,
Absolutely.
painters, photographers.
People who are passionate about what they do.
You go down this rabbit hole, and the rest of the world ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And you need something to pull you out and say, there are other people and activities that you actually love as much, if not a lot more.
Yeah. Though I will say that I think going down that rabbit hole is an incredible experience.
Yeah.
The trick is to make sure you get pulled out.
Right.
But, to actually, essentially with children, this is one reason why I think business is so valuable for children, to be surrounded by business or people who are passionate about their work, generally speaking.
Right.
But usually that's an entrepreneur, that describes an entrepreneur. Right. But they have this ringside seat on what it is to live a passionate and engaged life. And I think it's a tremendous gift. You're not just kind of clocking it in. I mean, you love what you do. It stimulates you. It gets, your thought processes going. That's an incredible thing for kids to see. That's what you'd want them to do.
Absolutely.
In their life, is have a life like that, have a livelihood that engages them in that way. But that's the trick, is to understand that it's okay. I mean, there is this addiction thing. I think it actually may be physically addicting, actually, with our little things going off in our brains. And I certainly have felt it. When I wrote this book, that was one of the great joys, actually, for Gary and me, and it's a surprising outcome of writing this book, because it was a passion project for me. I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body, really, when it comes to taking risk. I'm inventive and I'm creative, but risk is not for me, especially financial risk. But I threw myself into this project, and I worked 7 days a week. I mean, he was the one eating dinners alone for the first time, when I was up in the
payback.
I didn't look at it that way. Maybe there was a part of me that did a little, but we really walked in the other person's shoes. I mean, how often do you get to do that with your spouse?
Yeah.
And it woke us both up. I mean, I got the entrepreneurial thing. It's just like all I wanted to do was work.
Right.
that's what I wanted to be doing.
Right.
I mean, of course it was hard and it was demanding and there were deadlines, but I loved it at the same time. And for him, you know, he felt a little
left out,
left behind.
Right.
Because he was.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so there was reason for that.
It is an amazing dance.
It is. So our consciousness has been seriously raised by that process. But again, you don't have to flip roles with your spouse to experience that. I mean, that's part of why I wrote the book. Again,
right.
My hope for the book is that it really increases understanding and empathy. That's really my hope. So that, and I think it has to some degree, and the columns have, just because I've heard from entrepreneurs.
Sure.
It's like, oh, I kind of get what my husband or wife has been going through. So.
Yeah. No, and I love it, because anything that can offer guidance to that dynamic between a husband and wife or partners, you know, as you know, especially if one person is the person who's really building, you know, that venture.
Yes.
I think there's so little guidance out there.
Everyone's out there figuring it out by themselves.
Right.
And worse than that, everyone feels like they're screwing up in their own particular way. Everybody else seems to have it together.
Right.
Like, I know we felt this. I can't tell you for how many years. You know, my friends, especially because I didn't have many entrepreneur friends for the first decade or so. I mean, we met people over the years, but I had friends, they seemed to be advancing their lives in normal ways. You know, they were buying home. I was just dying for a mortgage. It's like, I want a house, you know, I just want a home. Or they were, you know, they had paid vacations, they had paid medical insurance, and it's just like, how did we screw up so badly? You know, here we are in our mid-30s.
Meanwhile, they're probably looking at you saying, oh, they're living the entrepreneurial life, building something.
Trust me.
Oh, they're not?
Nobody in our case. Trust me. You know, they'd come to the farm and we'd have them like loading pallets onto trucks.
Okay.
I mean, it's just like, get me out of here. This place is freezing and I have to work. I thought I was having this mellow weekend in the country.
Right.
You know, it's like,
well, now maybe they're like,
now it's different.
Along the way, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I love that you're creating a resource, and I love that you're creating sort of a forum for conversation around these issues in a way that most people just kind of tuck it away and they don't have any guidance.
Yeah.
The bigger framework for this conversation and for this project that sort of I've been exploring is, and it's called, you know, the Good Life Project. And so if I offer that term to you and I ask you in your experience, what does it mean to live a good life? What's important to you? What comes up?
Well, my grandparents are from the south of France, so that might color this answer. But I think passion. I really do. I think a passionate life is a beautiful life. And the problems arise if you're a passionate person. The problems arise when you're passionate about more than one thing. But that doesn't mean don't be passionate about whatever it is, whether it's your family life or your work or your volunteer activities or the things you do for yourself, whether it's meditation or sports. It's important to embrace all of it and not think that, oh my God, because I'm loving my work and because I went down that rabbit hole of thinking up a new marketing idea and I sort of disappeared for 12 hours, that I'm being a bad parent. You're not being a bad parent. So that's my answer. I think a passionate life.
And I think I completely agree. I think the really big challenge arises when the passion becomes 2 or 3 or 4.
Exactly. But that's not to say don't be passionate.
Right. No.
You know?
I completely get it.
Yeah, and I think there are ways to make it, I really do. There are ways to make it work. Sometimes not in the short run. You know, sometimes there's just dues. There's times when you pay your dues. You know, when you've got a newborn and you're disproportionately spending a lot of time because you've got a new baby in the family. When you've got a new business, hopefully you don't have the new business and the newborn at the same time like we did.
Me too.
So there are times when there's more draws on your energy, that, you know, more in one direction than another. But I think the hope is that in the net, you know, things will work. And I have great faith. They have for us, so.
I love that. Well, I thank you so much for your insights and for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, I did too.
So I'm Jonathan Fields, and Good Life Project signing off.